The night was cold, and the city moved with its usual rush, people walking fast, cars honking, lights glowing in the distance. But in one quiet corner near a small café, a barefoot boy sat alone. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt, and his thin hands shivered as the wind brushed past him. Yet his eyes, deep and bright, were full of something no one else seemed to notice: curiosity. From INSIDE. The café came the soft, beautiful sound of a piano. Each note drifted out through the glass door like a whisper, and the boy listened as if every sound carried a secret meant only for him. He didn't move, didn't beg, didn't speak. He just sat there, his small fingers moving in the air, pretending to play along with the melody he heard. People walked past him, some looked away, others glanced briefly, and kept going. No one stopped, but the boy didn't seem to care. The music filled the emptiness around him, wrapping him in a strange warmth that even the cold night couldn't take away. Inside the café, laughter and chatter blended with the piano tune, but the boy focused only on the keys he couldn't see. Every rise and fall of the music made his eyes light up. He could almost feel the piano beneath his fingertips, smooth, real, alive. When the song ended, he waited, hoping it would start again. Minutes passed, and then another tune began, softer this time, like a lullaby. The boy smiled faintly, his lips dry, his breath visible in the cold air. He didn't know who was playing, or why, but it felt like the music was talking to him. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of hope flickered, a dream he couldn't name. Maybe one day, he thought, he would touch a real piano. Maybe one day, someone would teach him. But then reality returned, the rumble of passing cars, the smell of food he couldn't buy, the feeling of hunger tightening his stomach. Still, he stayed. The music was his food tonight, and it was enough. A cafe worker came out to throw garbage, and saw him sitting there. "Go on, boy, you can't stay here," the man said tiredly. The boy nodded and stood, but before leaving, he turned once more toward the sound of the piano. His gaze lingered as if trying to remember every note, every beat, every feeling. Then, slowly, he walked away, his bare feet brushing against the cold pavement. The city swallowed him in its noise, but the music stayed with him, echoing in his mind, playing on invisible keys that only he could hear. Somewhere between the noise of traffic and the silence of the night, a dream had been born, fragile, hidden, but alive, waiting for the day when the world would finally listen. Late that night, when the streets had grown quiet and the cafe lights began to dim, the boy lingered nearby, hiding in the shadows. The sound of chairs scraping the floor and laughter fading away told him that the day was ending. When the last customer left and the cafe owner began to close up, the boy crept closer to the window. Through the glass, he finally saw it, the piano. It wasn't just any instrument to him. It was a treasure, glowing under the soft golden light. Its surface shone like calm water, reflecting the room around it. The black and white keys looked like magic pieces waiting to be touched. The boy pressed his palms against the cold glass, his breath fogging up the window as he stared in awe. For the first time, the sound he always loved had a face, the piano itself. His eyes followed the gentle curve of its frame, the shadows dancing across its lid, and he imagined himself sitting there, his hands moving with confidence, creating the same kind of beauty that had captured his heart so many nights before. He could almost hear it, the melody that would rise from his fingertips if only he were allowed to play. For a brief moment, the world around him disappeared. There was no hunger, no cold, no loneliness. There was only the piano and a dream that felt so close it made his heart beat faster. But then reality crept back in. The cafe owner turned off the last light, and the piano slowly faded into darkness. The boy stepped back, his reflection vanishing with the glow. The street felt colder now, but something inside him had changed. That image, the piano shining under the lights, burned into his memory. He walked back to his usual spot under the bridge, his bare feet aching from the chill, but he didn't feel the pain the same way anymore. His mind was full, his heart restless. Every sound he heard, the hum of the wind, the tapping of raindrops on metal, started to turn into rhythm, into music only he could understand. He didn't know how or when, but he promised himself that one day he would touch those keys. He would make them sing, as he curled up for the night. The stars above looked faint and far, but he whispered softly, "Someday." The street was his bed, the sky his blanket, and his dream, the only warmth he had left. But that dream, fragile as it was, refused to fade. It glowed quietly within him, like a small flame in the dark, a promise that the boy on the street might one day stand where the music lived, and play not for survival, but for the world to finally listen. The following evening, as the café buzzed with soft chatter and the piano played its familiar tune, the boy returned to his usual spot by the window. He sat quietly, hugging his knees to stay warm, his eyes once again fixed on the glowing instrument inside. The melody wrapped around him like a blanket, and for a while, he forgot about the hunger in his stomach and the cold beneath him. But that night, something different happened. A man stepped out of a sleek car parked nearby, a man in a tailored suit, carrying the air of someone who rarely noticed the world beyond his schedule. As he walked toward the café, his eyes caught sight of the small figure sitting by the door, motionless, listening. He paused. Most people hurried past the boy, pretending he wasn't there, but the man hesitated. There was something unusual about the stillness in the boy's face, something pure. Instead of asking for money or food, the boy was simply listening. Curious, the man approached slowly, his shoes clicking softly against the pavement. "Why do you sit here every night?" he asked in a calm voice. Startled, the boy looked up, unsure if he was in trouble. He hesitated, then spoke softly, "I just like how it sounds." The man blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of the answer. There was no plea for help, no story of pity, only quiet truth. "Do you know how to play?" the man asked. The boy shook his head, lowering his eyes. "No, sir, I only watch. I try to remember how the hands move." The man studied him, the dirt on his face, the thinness of his arms, but also the light in his eyes that refused to fade. For a brief moment, something stirred inside the man, a memory, perhaps, of when he too once had dreams that seemed unreachable. "You really love it, don't you?" he said gently. The boy nodded, his lips curling into a small, shy smile. "It feels like the piano talks," he whispered. The man chuckled softly, not out of mockery but admiration. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken about music with such pure wonder. As he turned to go inside, he looked back once more at the boy and said, "Stay here." The boy didn't understand why, but something about the man's tone felt different, kind, but serious. Moments later, the man returned with a small paper bag. Inside was a sandwich and a cup of warm milk. The boy stared at it, his eyes wide. "Eat," the man said. "Music sounds better when you're not hungry." Then he walked away into the café, leaving the boy speechless. That night, as the boy ate his first warm meal in days, he felt a strange feeling, hope. He didn't know it yet, but this brief encounter had just opened the first door to the dream he thought he could never reach. The next evening, the café glowed with golden lights, and soft chatter filled the air as people sipped coffee and laughed over quiet conversations. Outside, the boy sat in his usual corner, listening to the piano drifting through the glass, his heart moving with every note. Inside, the wealthy man from the night before sat near the counter, watching him through the window. Something about the boy's quiet devotion had stayed with him all night. He couldn't forget the way those small fingers had moved in the air, as if touching invisible keys. Finally, moved by curiosity, he stood and approached the cafe owner, an older man, wiping down glasses behind the bar. "That boy out there," the man said, pointing toward the window. "Would you let him play your piano? Just once." The owner looked up, startled, then chuckled. "That street boy, he doesn't know how to play," he said, shaking his head. "Letting him touch a piano like this, people would laugh." The entrepreneur smiled faintly. "Then let them laugh," he said calmly. "Let's see what happens." Word spread quickly across the cafe. Some smiled politely, thinking it was a kind gesture. Others smirked, expecting a clumsy performance that would end in awkward silence. The owner hesitated, but the man's tone left little room for argument. "Fine," he said finally. "But don't blame me if he breaks a key." The man nodded and walked outside. The boy looked up as the door opened, confusion in his eyes. "Come inside," the man said gently. The boy froze, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Me?" he asked softly. "Yes," the man replied. "It's time to see if those invisible keys you've been playing have music in them." The boy's heart raced. For a moment, fear and excitement tangled inside him. He wiped his hands nervously on his torn clothes and followed the man in. The cafe grew quiet as the door closed behind him. Warm air and the smell of coffee surrounded him, a world far from the cold pavement outside. The piano stood in the center, shining under the soft lights, its polished surface reflecting his nervous face. The boy hesitated, his small hands trembling as he reached toward the instrument he had only ever dreamed of touching. The room was silent now, the audience waiting for what they thought would be a child's awkward attempt. But the man who had brought him in watched quietly, his expression calm and expectant. The boy closed his eyes and placed his fingers on the keys, feeling their cool surface beneath his skin. For a long moment, nothing happened, only silence and shallow breaths. Then, slowly, he pressed the first key. A soft note filled the air, followed by another, then another. It was hesitant, fragile, yet strangely beautiful. The cafe that once buzzed with laughter fell completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. The boy's fear began to fade, replaced by something stronger, the memory of every melody he had ever heard through the window. His fingers began to dance, not perfectly, but with heart, and for the first time, the street boy wasn't just listening to music, he was creating it. The cafe was filled with the low hum of chatter and clinking cups when the boy took his seat at the piano. His small frame looked almost lost against the polished wood and ivory keys. The room, curious but doubtful, watched in silence. The owner stood behind the counter, arms crossed, waiting for the moment to end quickly. The wealthy man sat at a nearby table, eyes calm but focused, as if he already knew something extraordinary was about to happen. The boy's heart pounded in his chest. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling with fear and hope. For a moment, he couldn't move. What if they laughed? What if nothing came out? The piano looked beautiful, but intimidating, like a door to a world he didn't belong to. He took a deep breath, remembering the melodies he used to hum alone in the alley when no one was watching. Slowly, he pressed one key. A single note floated through the cafe, soft, uncertain, but alive. Then another followed, and another. The sound was shaky at first, uneven and fragile, like the voice of someone learning to speak. Some people exchanged glances, but then something began to change. The boy's hand stopped trembling, his body relaxed. The hesitant notes began to flow together, forming a melody so gentle and pure that it seemed to reach beyond the room. The cafe's noise faded. Even the rain tapping against the window slowed, as if the whole world paused to listen. The tune carried sadness and hope woven together, a story without words. Every note seemed to say something he never could. His loneliness, his dreams, his hunger, his wonder. The man who had brought him in felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard many musicians play, but this was something different. It wasn't skill alone, it was honesty. It was the sound of a soul speaking. The customers leaned forward unconsciously, drawn in by the emotion that poured from those trembling hands. A woman near the window pressed her palm to her heart. The cafe owner's eyes widened slightly, the hardness in his face softening. The melody grew stronger, richer, no longer broken but whole, as if the boy had found his rhythm, the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Time melted away. For those few minutes, there was no cafe, no class, no distance between the rich and poor, only music. When the final note came, it was so delicate it almost disappeared into the sound of the rain. Silence followed, deep, heavy, filled with wonder. No one moved. Then, one by one, hands began to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the cafe echoed with applause. The boy looked up, startled, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had simply wanted to hear music. He never imagined he would become the one to create it. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and awe, he realized he had finally been heard. When the last note faded into the air, the cafe felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. The boy's hands rested motionless on the piano keys, his shoulders trembling slightly, as if afraid to look up. For a long stretching second, there was no sound, not from the people, not from the rain, not even from the hum of the city outside. It was as if the entire world had paused to absorb what had just happened. The melody still lingered in the room like a whisper that refused to fade. The man who had invited the boy stood frozen, eyes glistening. He had heard music played by the most talented performers, in grand halls filled with chandeliers and applause. But none of it had ever struck him the way this had. This wasn't the perfection of a trained pianist. It was something raw, something real. Every mistake, every trembling note, carried a story. It was as if the piano itself had cried through the boy's fingers. Slowly, the man's hand went to his face, brushing away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. He wasn't the only one. A woman near the counter sniffled quietly, covering her mouth, while an old gentleman near the door wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Even the cafe owner, who had laughed earlier, stood still behind the counter, his usual frown replaced by something softer, guilt, maybe, or awe. The boy finally looked up, confused by the silence. He thought he had done something wrong. His eyes darted around, waiting for someone to speak, to laugh, to tell him to stop pretending. But no one did. Instead, there was this quiet stillness, a kind of respect he had never known. The man stepped closer, but even his movements felt slow, careful, like he didn't want to disturb the fragile piece hanging in the air. The boy's small chest rose and fell quickly, his heart pounding. "Did I? Was it bad?" he asked in a timid voice. The man smiled through his tears and shook his head slowly. "No, son," he whispered. "It was beautiful." The words seemed to open something in the room. A chair creaked. Then, softly at first, a single person began to clap. Another joined, then another. Soon, the entire cafe was on its feet, their applause not loud and wild, but deep and meaningful, the kind of clapping that comes from the heart, not just the hands. Some people smiled through tears. Others just stood silently, nodding. The boy blinked, unsure how to react, but then a shy smile spread across his face. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not as a street boy, not as a beggar, but as someone who had given something valuable to the world. The man placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You just made everyone here remember what feeling sounds like." And in that moment, in that silence turned to warmth, a miracle had quietly happened. A forgotten child had made the world listen. The man slowly walked toward the boy, still stunned by what he had just witnessed. The applause had faded, but the emotions it carried still hung heavy in the air. The boy sat there quietly, his small hands resting on the piano keys, unsure what to do next. His heart raced as he looked up at the man, afraid that maybe he had done something wrong. But when he saw the man's face, the tears shining in his eyes, and the gentle smile trembling on his lips. The boy's fear softened into confusion. The man knelt down beside him and asked softly, "Where did you learn that? Who taught you to play like that?" The boy lowered his eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "No one taught me," he said. "I used to sit outside the music school. I listened through the window. I just remembered the sound." The man blinked in disbelief. "You mean, you learned just by listening?" The boy nodded slowly, almost apologetically, as if he expected not to be believed. The room grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't out of shock, it was admiration. People exchanged glances, realizing they weren't just in the presence of talent, but of something pure and rare. The man's chest tightened. He thought about how many nights this child must have sat in the cold, hungry, just to hear music, something most people took for granted. That kind of dedication couldn't be bought or taught. It came from something deep inside, from love, from longing. "What's your name, son?" the man asked softly. The boy hesitated, unsure if he should even answer. But there was warmth in the man's eyes, a kindness he hadn't seen before, so he replied quietly. The man nodded, repeating the name softly, as if memorizing it. Then he said words that made the boy's eyes widen with disbelief. "You don't belong on the streets. I'm going to help you. You'll have a place to stay, real food to eat, and piano lessons, real ones." For a moment, the boy just stared at him, trying to understand if this was a dream. The café had gone silent again, all eyes fixed on the pair, a street boy and a wealthy man. Two completely different worlds meeting in the middle of a quiet promise. "But why?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. The man smiled, still wiping his tears. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, what true beauty sounds like. You gave me more in one song than money ever could." The boy didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight, and his chest ached, but in the best way possible. Slowly, he nodded, his eyes filling with tears that refused to fall. The man reached out his hand, and after a small pause, the boy took it. In that moment, something changed, not just for the boy, but for everyone watching. It was a promise of hope, of second chances, and of how a single act of kindness could change to lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's life began to change in ways he had never dared to imagine. The man kept his promise. The boy was given a small room, warm meals, and a piano teacher who looked at him with both curiosity and disbelief. At first, the boy was shy, afraid to even sit at the piano in front of others. But once his fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. Fear, doubt, hunger, and even the cold memories of the streets. Music became his new home. Every day, he practiced until his small hands ached, yet he never complained. The teachers soon noticed something strange. He didn't just learn. He remembered everything after hearing it once. He had an ear that caught every note, every mistake, every emotion hidden in a melody. His gift was not taught, it was born. The man who had rescued him visited often, always sitting quietly in the corner, watching the boys progress with a proud smile. The world around them began to notice too. One day, a teacher invited a local journalist to listen. The next day, an article appeared in the newspaper, "From Street to Symphony, the boy who learned by listening." It spread faster than anyone expected. Soon, small cafes invited him to play again, this time as a guest, not a beggar. He wore clean clothes now, his hair trimmed, his face bright with quiet confidence. When he sat down to play, people didn't see a poor boy. They saw a musician whose heart spoke through every note. Then came television interviews, cameras flashing, reporters asking questions he didn't know how to answer. "How does it feel to be famous?" they asked. He smiled shyly and said, "I just like how it sounds." The same words he had once told the man outside the cafe. Fame didn't change him. Each night, after the interviews and concerts, he would return to his room and sit by the window, looking out at the city lights. Sometimes, when it rained, he would remember the nights he sat outside listening, hungry and cold, and wonder if some other boy was out there now, dreaming the same dream. The man often told him, "Never forget where you started," and he never did. His heart stayed as humble as the first night he touched those keys. The more he learned, the more he wanted to give back, to teach children who couldn't afford lessons, to play for shelters, and to remind everyone that talent could bloom even in the darkest places. His journey had only begun, but already it was a story that touched hearts across the city. The once homeless boy who had played for leftovers was now playing for the world, and through every note, he carried the echo of his past, a gentle reminder that dreams, no matter how small, can rise from the coldest streets and fill the world with music. Months later, the boy found himself standing behind the curtains of a grand concert hall, a place he had only seen on television before. The lights were bright, the air thick with expectation, and hundreds of people filled the seats, whispering softly as they waited. He wore a clean black suit, perfectly pressed, something he had never owned before. For a moment, his heart raced faster than ever. The memory of the cold nights on the street came rushing back, the hunger, the loneliness, the sound of the café piano drifting through the air. Now, he was here, standing on the same kind of stage that once existed only in his dreams. The man who had changed his life sat in the front row, eyes full of pride and tears. The boy took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. The announcer called his name, and the hall erupted in applause. As he walked toward the grand piano, each step echoed like a heartbeat, slow and strong. He sat down and stared at the shining keys. For a moment, he didn't move. The world seemed to hold its breath with him. Then, softly, he began to play. It was the same melody he had played that rainy night in the café, the one that had made strangers stop and listen. But this time, it was different. The notes were clearer, deeper, filled with emotion that only a heart that had suffered and survived could create. Every sound carried a story of the boy who once played invisible keys in the air, of the man who believed in him, of the streets that taught him resilience. The audience sat silent, their eyes fixed on the small figure on stage, fingers moving gracefully over the keys. Some smiled, others wiped away tears. It wasn't just music. It was a conversation between pain and hope, between what was and what could be. The final note hung in the air like a whisper, fading slowly until the room was silent again. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then, a single person began to clap, another joined, and soon, the entire hall stood to its feet, the applause rolling like thunder. The boy lifted his head, his eyes glistening, and smiled shyly. He bowed deeply, not just to the crowd, but to life itself, to every moment that had led him here. The man in the front row stood with tears streaming down his face, clapping the loudest of all. In that moment, the boy realized something. It wasn't just a performance. It was a promise kept, a dream fulfilled, and proof that no matter how broken the beginning, music could turn it into something beautiful. The lights dimmed, but the melody lingered in every heart, echoing long after the final note had fallen silent. The video of the boy's performance spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, clips of his concert flooded social media feeds across the world. People replayed the moment he touched the keys, the way his eyes closed as if he were speaking to the piano, not playing it. The melody, full of emotion and honesty, reached across borders and languages. News anchors spoke about him, calling him the boy who played from the heart. Musicians reacted with admiration. Teachers used his story as inspiration, and millions of strangers shed silent tears, watching a once-forgotten street boy fill a grand hall with music. But the most powerful part wasn't the music itself, it was the story behind it. The reminder that kindness can turn a small spark into a shining star. Messages began to pour in from every corner of the globe, People offering support, schools naming scholarships after him, and others saying his journey had helped them believe in their own dreams again. When he was invited to speak at a press event after the performance, he stood on stage, the same shy boy who once hid in the shadows of a café. Cameras flashed, microphones surrounded him, but he didn't seem overwhelmed. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "I just wanted to play." The room fell silent, those simple words hitting deeper than any long speech could. He didn't talk about fame, or money, or success, only the love for the music that had carried him through hunger and loneliness. His honesty broke through every barrier, reminding people of something they had forgotten, that beauty can come from pain, and greatness doesn't always wear fancy clothes or come from rich places. Around the world, people began donating to music programs for underprivileged children, inspired by his story. Some cafes placed pianos by their doors, hoping another young dreamer might find courage to play. The man who had once stopped to talk to a quiet boy outside a cafe watched all of it unfold with pride and tears. He knew now that his one small act of kindness had changed, not just one life, but countless others. As the boy traveled to new countries to perform, he carried with him not just talent, but a message that every heart, no matter how broken or forgotten, has a song worth hearing. The world didn't just listen to his music, it listened to his spirit, and as his final concert note echoed through the air that night, it seemed as if the stars themselves were listening to shining brighter, as if applauding the boy who once played invisible keys on a cold street, and ended up touching the entire world with the sound of his soul.